All right. Good morning, guys. So this is meant to be kind of a crash course in the new AP Gov Argumentative FRQ. So we're going to go through this, go through some of the basics, and then you're going to practice this FRQ. This will be the last lesson I post before spring break because you guys have Friday off too. And I'll go over some of the other ways you can reach me regarding this assignment at the end of the video. So in this lesson, you will see the rubric for the argumentative FRQ. This is going to be question 1 on the exam. You will learn how the points are spread across the rubric. The essay is out of 7 points. We're going to learn how those points are spread out. You're going to learn how to write a thesis statement that establishes a line of reasoning. In this essay, 1 point, you have to write a thesis, and it has to have a line of reasoning. And I'm going to go over what exactly that means and how you do that when you write your thesis statement. You're going to practice writing a thesis statement with a line of reasoning. And you're going to practice writing a modified argumentative FRQ that's on the exam on May 11th. Okay, so let's get into it. Question 1. Okay, question 1 will assess the student's ability to do the following. There's nothing to fill in the notes here, guys. Just follow along. This is to review what the question's asking you to do. You're going to articulate a defensible claim or thesis that responds to the question and, important part, and establishes the line of reasoning. If you don't have that line of reasoning part, you're not getting the points on the thesis, and that kind of makes it very difficult to get any more points on the rest of the question. You need to provide evidence from one of the foundational documents. Those are the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence, letter from Birmingham Jail, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. All those documents we've covered in detail. Okay, and they're going to give you one of those. Now you're going to provide evidence from a second foundational document or from your knowledge, of course, concepts to support the claim. So depending on the question, you're either going to have to use one of the documents they give you, or you're going to have to use something from your knowledge of AP Gov. Now, this part here, or knowledge from course concepts, this can essentially be anything, really, your second piece of evidence, but it has to be concrete. So the way I teach it is, court cases is a good way to get that second piece of evidence from your knowledge of course concepts. Although the Supreme Court case is not required to be a piece of evidence. And then use reasoning to explain why your evidence supports your claim. So you have to write a thesis, give evidence, and then you need to explain why both pieces of evidence support your argument. Okay? This is a very stripped down look at what the rubric is. Okay? So here, there's 3 parts of the rubric: your thesis, your evidence, and your reasoning. You get 1 point, okay, when you write a correct thesis that establishes a line of reasoning. The chunk of the points are given out in the evidence part, okay? To get all 4 points, you need both pieces of evidence to support the claim. So both pieces of evidence actually support what you're arguing, okay? And you need to go beyond simply explaining what that document does. You need to relate it back to the thesis. You need to explain why that document supports your argument, okay? And then the reason to explain how or why one piece of evidence supports the claim or thesis. So you need to make sure that you're writing the thesis, you're giving evidence, and that evidence is kind of related back to your thesis statement. You can't give evidence that doesn't support your claim. You're not going to get points for that. Okay, this is a lot of info I'm throwing at you right at the get-go, but all this is going to be more clear as you practice. Okay, this is what the rubric actually looks like. Okay, this link, I'm going to post this Google Slides presentation onto Google Classroom, and you can look at what the rubric actually looks like. The rubric you see here is it's complicated and convoluted, so I just kind of stripped it down for you guys. But if you want to take a look at what the rubric actually looks at when the people who are grading your test, what they're going to be looking at, this is what they're going to be looking at. So if you want to check that out, I would highly suggest checking that out, okay? Okay, back to our presentation here. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. So part 1 is the thesis. So how are we going to ace this test? So part 1, thesis. You need to formulate a defendable claim with a line of reasoning. Form your argument, and in your thesis statement, include the word because. This establishes a line of reasoning. The word because is how you're going to establish your line of reasoning. So let's look at an example. Let's say you're writing an argumentative essay on the political parties. So here's an example of the thesis statement. Political parties have changed over time. Okay, that's an argument that you could argue that it's a defensible claim. But there's no line of reasoning here. Okay, this is just really stripped down and basic argument. Now this is what one would look like with a line of reasoning. Political parties have changed over time because, notice the word because, of the influence of various factors like demographic shifts, world events, and certain influential people. Okay, so do you see the difference here? What is the difference? What's the difference between these two statements? Okay, pause the video and answer that question in the Google Doc. What's the difference between these two statements? Okay, and we're back. Now you're going to practice it on your own. You're going to look at this. This is an example of one of the argumentative FRQ questions, okay? So develop an argument that explains how power over education should be shared in the U.S. federalist system. Remember, a federal system, you divide the power between the federal and the state governments. They share powers, okay? Some are just for federal, some are just for states, though, as well. In your essay, okay, this is just showing each part of the essay that you have to do. This last part here, address opposing alternative or perspectives to refutation, concession, or rebuttal. That part's been removed from the requirements on the essay, so ignore that. All I want you to do right now is read this essay question and write a thesis statement with a line of reasoning. Okay, so make sure when you write it has a line of reasoning. So pause the video, read over this, and try to write a thesis statement revolving around this essay question. And then once you've written yours, I'm going to go to the next slide. I'm going to give you what I came up with. Okay, so pause the video, try your best. Okay, this is your first attempt at this type of thesis statement. Okay, I know you've done plenty of thesis statements in other classes, but try your best right now to write this one according to this question. Go ahead, pause the video and go ahead. Okay, now I'm going to show you the one I came up with. And obviously, I wrote this, so I'm not expecting you guys to have something this developed yet. Some of you will, but I'm not expecting all of you to have something like this quite yet. So here is a thesis statement around this question with a line of reasoning. Okay, again, keep in mind this is going to be a little more in depth than what I'm expecting, but I want to show you the best examples possible. Okay, here's my thesis. Education policy in a federal system should be shared in a way that allows the federal government to maintain some degree of control over the states, because this type of relationship is required through various parts of the Constitution, like Article 1, Section 8, and Article 6, and numerous Supreme Court cases. Okay, so it answers the prompt. Okay, I explain how I think education policy, okay, should be shared in a federalist system. Now, the whole rest of my essay needs to be me backing up that argument that the federal government should have some degree of control over the states. That's my argument. That's my thesis. Okay? Now, compare yours and mine together in that same part of the Google Doc, okay? Step 2, evidence. This is step 2, part 1, evidence. You need to make sure your evidence is relevant and relatable back to your specific argument. Okay, using one of the given documents. So this is the paragraph I came up with. I'm going to show you. This would be my evidence. One of my evidence. One piece of evidence. Article 1, Section 8, also known as the Necessary and Proper Clause, has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to allow implied powers of Congress. This is the part where I'm making it relevant and relatable. As the country has grown and the U.S. has become a global economic and military power, it's important that the federal government makes sure American citizens are being educated and prepared to enter this new technological world. Article 1, Section 8 gives them the power to do so. Common Core federal standards that could be voluntarily adopted by the states was one way the federal government has done this in the past. Okay, I added like a little extra outside knowledge sentence to kind of add some beef to this part of the essay. Okay, so you see how I've used the piece of evidence they've given me. I've related it back to the thesis. I've explained what that piece of evidence is. I've described it, and then I've related it back to my thesis. Okay, so now your second part of evidence, again, you're going to need another piece of evidence. You need to make sure this evidence is also relevant and relatable. Okay, using another document. Sometimes it's not given to you. Sometimes you can use the list that they've given you. Sometimes, and all the time, you can just use your knowledge of course concepts. Okay. So this is my paragraph for evidence part 2. So the second piece of evidence. Article 6, known as the Supremacy Clause, establishes the United States Constitution as the supreme law of the land. This means that federal law and policy always trump state law and policy. Therefore, again, here's the part where I make it relevant and relatable. Therefore, Article 6 further backs up the argument that the federal government should maintain a degree of control of the states when it comes to education. Although each state has had various education systems, it is important that each state has various education systems, it is important that the federal government offer assistance both in policy directives and resources. Okay, so I've used a piece of evidence that they gave. I used the supremacy clause and necessary proper clause to back up my argument that the federal government should have some control of the states when it comes to education. Okay, now the last paragraph. Explain why. Now, this, depending on how you write your essay, I kind of have already done this in my essay, but you need to make sure that this reason, to get the reasoning points, that you come out and you state it. It's a good idea to do that so that you get your points. So I've given you a sentence starters highlighted in yellow to help you with this paragraph. If you use the sentence starters, it will ensure that you get the reasoning points. Okay, so here's the last part of the essay. And the yellow is the sentence starter. These two pieces of evidence support my thesis because. So if you just come out and you state these two pieces of evidence support my thesis because, you'll get those reasoning points as long as you're correct and your evidence is correct. Because the reader, the essay, sees that you're making an effort to directly show how your evidence is supporting your claim. Okay, so here's my writing. These two pieces of evidence support my thesis because they both show how the relationship between the federal and state governments is supposed to operate. The necessary and proper clause creates a constitution that is a living document and able to change to meet the educational needs of modern American society. In addition, the supremacy clause allows the federal government to take dominance in educational policymaking matters and at times control the states to ensure the general welfare of the American people, no matter what state they live in. Okay, so you see, my argument was the federal government should have some sway over education policy. I used the necessary and proper clause as my first piece of evidence. The supremacy clause is my second piece of evidence, and I've related both pieces of evidence back to my original thesis. Okay? So simply put, there's nothing to write down here, guys. This essay is pretty simple. So real simply put, what you need is a thesis statement with the word because. This is going to be 2 to 3 sentences. Your thesis statement's one sentence, but your opening thesis can be 2 to 3 sentences. 2 documents that are relevant and relatable. Make sure they are relevant to what you're arguing, your specific argument, and you can relate them back to your thesis statement. This would be 3 sentences each for a total of 6. 3 sentences for each document, total of 6 sentences. Explain how or why your evidence supports your thesis. This could be 3 or 4 sentences in total. So when you're looking at it, guys, really this is, if you use this formula, and you don't have to use this formula because this is just kind of how I'm teaching it, but this is up to you. If you use this formula, you're looking at really an essay of like 12 to 14 sentences, okay? That's doable in 25 minutes. But you got to remember, okay, sentence structure should be at college level. Avoid overly simplistic and rudimentary sentences, okay, in your essays. You don't want real basic sentences that don't answer the question. You want to make each sentence count. Every sentence that you write should be somehow working towards the goal of backing up your argument. Okay? Make your sentences count. Especially since you only have 25 minutes to write this essay, you got to make sure that your writing is answering the question and that you're making each sentence count and that you're not putting irrelevant information into your essay as, fluff. Okay, so what did you learn? Answer these 4 questions in the Google Doc. I'm not going to pause and read these, go over it because it's kind of just a waste of time. So read these questions and answer in the Google Doc. Pause the video, go ahead. Okay, and we're back. Okay, stop. Don't go. You're going to stop right now. I'm going to explain because now you're going to practice this FRQ. Okay, the next slide has the practice essay question on it. I would wait to read the question until you're actually going to write your response. Do it like you are required to on the AP exam, which means get your notes out, your book out, and be ready. Time yourself to get a better idea of how long it is going to take you. Okay, the first one's difficulty is low. It will be graded and handed back with comments in Google Classroom. Okay, please read them. So guys, take your best stab. I'm going to put the question up here. Take your best stab at this question that you can. If you're having a lot of trouble with this process, with writing this, please email me and we can set up a Google Hangout and I can give you some one-on-one instruction. Again, if you're having trouble with this, email me. We can set up a Google Hangout and I'll give you one-on-one help with this. So don't freak out if you're struggling. Just email me and we can meet and we can figure this out. Okay? Make sure you type your essay right on that same Google Doc and turn it in to me completed, guys. And again, they'll be handed back with comments. Please read them. All right, guys. This is probably the last thing I'm going to post on here before spring break. So I hope you all have a great spring break. And don't forget, email me with any questions. Peace.